Your ex-wife is in labor and the baby is coming. What? Where is she now? The call came at 2:47 a.m., slicing through the darkness of his penthouse like a knife through silk. Kwon Ji-ho didn't flinch, didn't move, just stared at the unknown number illuminating his phone screen with cold blue light. In his world, calls at this hour meant blood, betrayal, or both. He was Seoul's Shadow King, the man whose name people whispered with reverence and terror, whose network of power stretched from Gangnam's glittering towers to Incheon's grimy ports. But the voice that greeted him wasn't one of his soldiers reporting casualties or territory lost. It was a woman, her words tumbling out in panicked English, her accent thick with fear, and something that sounded like desperation. Is this Kwon Ji-ho? You need to come now, please. She's having the baby, your ex-wife. It's happening now and she needs you. Before we dive in, beautiful people, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe. It's the best way you can support us as we continue delivering captivating stories that'll keep you hooked every single day. 9 months ago, he'd walked out of a lawyer's office with ink drying on papers that legally severed him from the only woman who'd ever made him feel human. Now fate was dragging him back with the news that she was bringing his child into the world. And Ji-ho knew, with the same certainty that had kept him alive through a dozen assassination attempts, that nothing on earth would stop him from getting to her side. Not rival gangs, not his damaged pride, not even the poisonous lies that had ripped them apart. Welcome to Kyle Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Ji-ho was moving before conscious thought caught up, his body operating on pure instinct honed by years of survival. He grabbed his keys from the glass table, his phone still pressed to his ear, his gun from the drawer because men like him never stepped outside unarmed, even for something as sacred as birth. His driver materialized from the shadows where he always waited, silent and efficient, and Ji-ho threw himself into the back seat of the matte black Range Rover that had witnessed countless deals and threats. Seoul Central Medical Center, VIP wing, drive like your life depends on it. His driver knew better than to question the urgency in Ji-ho's voice, that particular razor edge that suggested someone was about to die or be born, and tonight it was the latter. The city streaked past in bursts of neon and darkness, Seoul's nightlife pulsing like a living thing while Ji-ho's mind raced faster than the car. Zara. His wife. Former wife. The woman whose absence had carved a void in his chest so profound he'd stopped acknowledging it existed. She was giving birth to his child right now, a child he hadn't known about until 3 minutes ago when a stranger's terrified voice shattered his carefully maintained control. 9 months of silence. 9 months of convincing himself she was better off without the violence that clung to him like a second skin. 9 months of lying to himself that he could survive without her. All of it rendered meaningless because she needed him and he would walk through fire to reach her. The hospital rose before him like a fortress of glass and steel, its windows glowing with the artificial warmth of fluorescent lights. Ji-ho was out of the vehicle before it stopped completely, his expensive shoes hitting the pavement with purpose. The emergency entrance doors parted automatically, and he strode through them with the kind of presence that made security guards straighten and nurses step aside without being asked. Everyone in Seoul knew Kwon Ji-ho's face. Knew what it meant when he appeared anywhere. Knew that crossing him was a death sentence delivered with surgical precision. The receptionist's fingers trembled on her keyboard as she searched the system, her eyes darting between the screen and his face like she was afraid sustained eye contact might trigger something violent. Zara Mitchell, maternity ward, she's in labor. The words came out steady, but Ji-ho could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. 4th floor, birthing suite 408, the woman stammered, already reaching for the phone, probably to warn the staff that Seoul's most dangerous man was headed their way. Ji-ho didn't wait for the elevator. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his breath controlled despite the 4 flights, his mind cataloging questions he couldn't answer yet. Why hadn't she told him? How long had she known? Did she hate him so thoroughly that she'd planned to raise his child in secret, erasing him from their lives like he'd never existed? The thought sent rage coursing through his veins, hot and immediate, but he forced it down because anger wouldn't help right now. Right now, Zara needed him present and whole, not fractured by emotions he couldn't afford to feel. He reached the 4th floor and slowed his pace, forced himself to breathe, to remember that bursting through the door like an avenging demon would only terrify her. The corridor was hushed except for the mechanical beep of monitors and, somewhere distant, a newborn's cry piercing the quiet. Suite 408. He could see through the observation window. Zara was there, doubled over with pain, her dark skin gleaming with sweat, one hand gripping the bed rail while another woman, equally dark-skinned with worried eyes and protective body language, rubbed circles on her back and whispered encouragement in what sounded like Yoruba. The sight of Zara in pain activated every protective instinct Jiho had brutally suppressed over 9 months of forced separation. He pushed the door open slowly. Both women turned, and the expression that crossed Zara's face when she saw him was everything he'd hoped for and feared. Shock and relief, and something that looked dangerously close to love, all warring in those deep brown eyes he'd memorized during their brief, intense marriage. She was more devastating than his memory had preserved. Her natural curls were pulled into a messy bun, her dark skin luminous despite the obvious pain, her body fuller with the pregnancy that had transformed her. She wore a standard hospital gown that somehow made her look regal, and Jiho felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until it bled. Jiho, his name left her lips like a question wrapped in disbelief. "You actually came." The surprise in her voice was a knife between his ribs because of course he came. Did she really believe there was any force in existence capable of keeping him away from her in this moment? "You called," he said, moving to her bedside like magnetic force was dragging him there, like his body remembered the path even though his mind had tried to forget. "Did you think I'd stay away?" His voice came out rougher than intended, revealing emotions he'd buried under layers of ice and violence. A contraction seized her, stealing whatever answer she might have offered. Jiho watched pain transform her beautiful face and felt utterly helpless in a way that no enemy had ever made him feel. He couldn't threaten this away, couldn't buy her relief, couldn't eliminate suffering with the tools that defined his existence. The other woman, her friend, stepped back with assessing eyes that suggested she was cataloging him for potential threats. And Jiho found himself doing something he hadn't done in 9 months. He touched her. His hand settled on her lower back where he instinctively knew the pain centered, applying firm pressure the way he remembered from those pregnancy apps he'd secretly downloaded before their marriage imploded. Before manufactured evidence and paid liars convinced Zara he'd betrayed her with another woman. "Breathe through it," he murmured in Korean, then switched to English for her sake. Just like the book said. It was a lie. They'd never gotten far enough in her first pregnancy to practice breathing techniques. They'd barely survived the first few weeks before his world had detonated around them. Before doctored security footage and a woman he'd never touched destroyed everything they were building. But the lie felt right, felt like the future they should have created together, the one he was determined to reclaim regardless of the cost. Zara's laugh was breathless and laced with pain. "We never practiced anything. We barely made it past 8 weeks before it all fell apart, before you supposedly cheated and I supposedly stopped loving you." The reminder of their shattered marriage hung in the air like gunsmoke. But Jiho pushed it aside because the past could wait for resolution. Right now, his wife, ex-wife, the mother of his unborn child, needed him focused and present and strong enough for both of them. Her friend introduced herself as Amina, Zara's roommate and self-appointed guardian. She studied Jiho with the kind of protective suspicion that suggested she'd heard every detail of their failed marriage and had formed opinions about whose fault it was. The hours that followed blurred into a sequence of pain and presence. Jiho stayed anchored at Zara's side through every contraction, every moment of fear, every second she crushed his hand with strength that would have impressed his soldiers. He welcomed the pain because it was nothing compared to what she was enduring, nothing compared to 9 months of living in a personal hell constructed from lies and misunderstanding. Amina hovered with ice chips and encouraging words, but it was Jiho that Zara kept turning to, kept reaching for, kept needing in ways that made his chest constrict with feelings he'd thought were dead. When the doctor finally arrived, A competent woman with steady hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Jiho and Zara and asked the question that would reshape everything. "Father?" Her tone was clinical, but her gaze was calculating, already noting the tension between them, the way Zara's fingers were locked around his like he was her only anchor in a storm. "Yes," Jiho said before Zara could speak, his voice carrying the kind of authority that ended arguments before they started. "I'm the father." Zara's eyes found his, wide and searching, looking for something he prayed she could find. The truth, the regret, the desperate hunger to be part of this moment, part of her life, part of their child's future in whatever form she'd allow. She didn't contradict him. The doctor nodded, satisfied, and began her examination while Jiho held Zara's hand and pretended his entire world wasn't restructuring itself with every labored breath she took. The doctor's expression shifted to concern as she worked, her brow creasing with the kind of worry that made Jiho's blood run cold. "The baby's heart rate is decelerating," she said with controlled urgency. "We need to perform an emergency cesarean immediately." The words hit Jiho like bullets he couldn't dodge. Zara's grip on his hand tightened to the point of pain, her eyes flooding with tears. "My baby? Will my baby be okay? Please tell me my baby's going to be okay." The fear in her voice made Jiho want to destroy something, made him want to tear apart reality until he found a way to fix this, to bend the universe to his will the way everything else eventually bent. But this wasn't his domain. This was medicine and biology and forces beyond his control, no matter how much power he commanded in Seoul's underworld. The doctor squeezed Zara's shoulder with practiced reassurance. "We're going to take excellent care of both of you. Dad, you'll need to step outside while we prep." "No." The word came out flat and immovable. Jiho's hand tightened around Zara's. "I'm not leaving her side." The doctor opened her mouth to protest, but something in Jiho's expression made her recalculate. She'd worked in Seoul's premier hospital long enough to recognize true power when she encountered it, to know which battles were worth fighting. "You can scrub in, but you follow every instruction I give or you're removed. Clear?" Jiho nodded once, already moving to the sink, already pulling on the sterile gown and mask, already doing whatever was necessary to remain beside Zara through this. The operating theater was blindingly bright and terrifyingly efficient. Zara was conscious but sedated, her eyes tracking Jiho's every movement like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. He positioned himself beside her head, one hand holding hers, the other gently stroking her curls with a tenderness that would have shocked anyone who knew him professionally. "I'm right here," he murmured close to her ear. "I'm not going anywhere. You're going to be fine. Our baby's going to be fine. I swear it." It was a promise he had no authority to make, a promise that defied medicine and probability and fate itself. But he meant every syllable with a conviction that had kept him alive through countless death threats. The surgery unfolded behind a sterile barrier that blocked Zara's view. Jiho watched the doctor work with precise movements, watched her make the incision, watched her carefully extract a tiny, perfect, screaming human being. A son. His son. The doctor lifted him briefly before transferring him to the warming station where nurses cleaned him and checked his vitals and performed all the mysterious rituals that welcomed new life. Jiho couldn't tear his eyes away. He was so impossibly small, so fragile, with dark skin and a shock of black hair and lungs that clearly worked perfectly based on his furious protests. "He's beautiful," Zara whispered, tears streaming down her face toward her ears. "Jiho, he's so beautiful. Look at him." Jiho couldn't form words. His throat had closed around emotions he didn't have vocabulary for. Beautiful was insufficient. This was a miracle. A piece of him and Zara made flesh, living proof that love could create something pure even when everything else was destroyed. The nurses completed their assessment and brought the baby over, placing him carefully on Zara's chest for immediate contact. Zara's hands came up to cradle their son, and Jiho watched his entire existence reorganize itself around this moment. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, the nurse announced with a smile. Perfectly healthy despite the dramatic arrival. "Have you chosen a name?" Jiho looked at Zara. They'd never discussed names, never discussed anything because she'd been pregnant and alone and hiding it from him for reasons he still couldn't comprehend. Zara's eyes met his over their son's head. "Kofi," she said softly. "After my grandfather. Kofi Kwan." Jiho's heart stopped at the sound of his family name attached to his son. Zara hadn't changed it back, hadn't severed that connection even through divorce. "Kofi Kwan," he repeated, testing how it felt on his tongue, feeling it settle into his bones like it had always belonged there. "It's perfect. He's perfect." Later, after the surgery was complete and Zara had been transferred to recovery, after the initial chaos had mellowed into the steady rhythm of monitors and distant hospital sounds, Jiho stood by the window holding his son while Zara slept. Kofi was bundled in a blue blanket, his tiny face peaceful now that the trauma of birth had passed. He was so small in Jiho's arms, so vulnerable, so completely dependent on him for protection and provision. Jiho had held weapons that ended lives and signed contracts worth millions and built an empire on calculated violence. But holding his son was the most terrifying experience of his existence. "You're going to have everything," he whispered to Kofi in Korean. "Everything I was denied. Love and safety and a father who would burn this entire city to ashes to keep you protected. No one will ever harm you. No one will ever make you doubt your worth. I promise you this on my life." Kofi's impossibly tiny hand wrapped around Jiho's finger with surprising strength, and something inside Jiho shattered and reformed simultaneously. He'd thought his heart was forged from steel, hardened by years of violence and betrayal and survival. But this small being had cracked it open, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would never be the same man. Zara stirred in the hospital bed behind him. Jiho turned to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't fully decipher. "You're natural with him," she said quietly. "Like you've been doing this for years instead of hours." Jiho crossed to the bed and carefully placed Kofi in her arms, watching as Zara's face transformed with a love so pure it physically hurt to witness. "I've had 9 months to think about this," she continued, her voice barely audible. 9 months to read everything, watch every video, imagine every possible scenario. But you just walked in and immediately knew what to do. "How?" "Because he's mine," Jiho said simply. "Ours. And I spent 9 months imagining a future I thought was impossible. When I downloaded those pregnancy apps before the divorce, it wasn't idle curiosity. It was hope. Hope that somehow we'd fix what was broken and I'd get to be the father I should have been from the beginning." Zara's eyes filled with fresh tears. "You couldn't have known. How could you when I never told you?" The guilt in her voice made Jiho sit on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb her or the baby. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the question that had been consuming him since the phone call. 9 months, Zara. You carried our son for 9 months and never once reached out. Did you hate me so completely that you wanted to erase me from his life?" The pain in his voice was raw and exposed, the kind of vulnerability he never showed anyone. But this was Zara. She'd always been able to see past his armor to the damaged places he tried to hide. "I didn't know how to tell you," Zara said, her free hand reaching for his. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after I signed those papers. 3 weeks after I'd convinced myself you'd betrayed me, that you'd destroyed everything we built, that staying away was the only way to survive the pain. And then suddenly there was this baby, this piece of you growing inside me, and I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call immediately, but the other part, the part that was still bleeding and broken, was terrified you'd reject us both." Jiho's jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. "I would never reject my child. Never. Even if you'd told me while signing those divorce papers, even if you'd used it as a weapon, I would have fought for this baby, for you, for us." Zara's tears fell faster, silent tracks down her dark skin. "I know that now, but back then, in those first weeks, I was so angry and hurt and lost. And by the time I'd processed enough to consider reaching out, so much time had passed. I convinced myself you'd moved on, that you were better off without the complication of a child you never planned for." "Moved on?" Jiho's laugh was bitter and sharp. "I haven't moved on, Zara. I haven't looked at another woman, haven't touched another woman, haven't wanted anything except the chance to prove those security videos were fabricated, that woman was paid to destroy us. 9 months of hell because the only person I've ever wanted was you and you were gone and I didn't know how to bring you back. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears with unexpected gentleness. There is no moving on from you. There's only surviving until you come back. Zara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. Sorry I let fear and pride keep Kofi from his father. Sorry for everything that went wrong between us. Jiho kissed her forehead softly, mindful of her exhaustion and surgical pain. We'll fix it. All of it. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we're going to repair this, because I'm not losing you again. I'm not losing him. His eyes dropped to Kofi sleeping peacefully in Zara's arms. You're both mine, and I protect what's mine with everything I am. A knock interrupted them. Amina entered with coffee and a knowing expression that suggested she'd been deliberately giving them privacy. She set the cups down and studied Jiho with marginally less suspicion than before. You're really staying? She asked bluntly. Because Zara's been through hell, and if you're just going to disappear when things get difficult, it would be kinder to leave now before Kofi gets attached. Jiho met her challenging gaze without flinching. I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever. This is my family, and I'm going to take care of them. Amina's expression softened fractionally. Good, because that little boy deserves a father who shows up and Zara deserves someone who fights for her instead of letting lies destroy everything. She grabbed her jacket. I'm going to get some real sleep, but I'll be back later. Try not to create any more babies while I'm gone. The comment made Zara laugh despite her exhaustion. Amina winked and left, closing the door quietly behind her. The room settled into comfortable silence, just the three of them breathing together. The next morning brought complications that extended beyond emotional reconciliation. Jiho was half asleep in the chair beside Zara's bed, his body too large for the furniture, but refusing to leave when his phone vibrated with a message from his second-in-command. 2 words, crisis, warehouse. Jiho looked at Zara still sleeping peacefully with Kofi in the bassinet beside her and made a decision. He wasn't leaving. Whatever situation had erupted in his absence could wait, or his people could handle it without him. For the first time in his career, his empire ranked second to something infinitely more important. But fate had different plans. His phone rang and the name on the screen made his jaw tighten. Park Min-jae, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who'd been managing operations while Jiho was at the hospital. Boss, we have a serious problem. The words were clipped and urgent, carrying the kind of tension that meant someone was about to die. Jiho stood and moved to the corridor, closing the door softly to avoid waking Zara. Talk. There's been activity, Min-jae said. Your enemies know you're vulnerable. They're positioning for something. I don't have specifics yet, but the timing is suspicious. Right after you vanish for a night to be with your ex-wife. How do they know where I am? Jiho's voice dropped to the dangerous whisper that made hardened criminals nervous. Someone talked. We're investigating, but meanwhile you need to secure your position. They smell weakness, and they're going to strike. Jiho's mind raced through possibilities, through scenarios, through the careful calculations that had kept him alive and powerful for 12 years. He couldn't leave Zara and Kofi exposed, but he also couldn't let his empire collapse because he was distracted. Triple security at the hospital. No one gets on this floor without authorization. And send Choi Hannah to me immediately. Choi Hannah arrived 30 minutes later, a lean woman in her 40s with the kind of efficiency that came from years in Jiho's organization. She'd been his security chief for 8 years, had saved his life once, and was one of perhaps 3 people he trusted absolutely. Boss, she said by way of greeting, her eyes scanning the hospital corridor with professional assessment. We have a situation. Tell me something I don't already know, Jiho muttered. What's the intelligence? 3 organizations are maneuvering against your territory. They think you're vulnerable because of the divorce, because you've been unpredictable lately. I haven't been unpredictable. I've been grieving. There's a difference. Hannah's expression softened marginally. I know, but they don't interpret it that way. They see opportunity. And there's something else. She hesitated, which was unusual. Hannah never hesitated. One of the organizations is being directed by someone with a personal vendetta, someone who knew about Zara, who might have orchestrated the security footage that destroyed your marriage. Jiho went absolutely still, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. Who? Jinsik, your former partner. The man you expelled 7 years ago for embezzling funds. Jiho's hands curled into fists at his sides. Jinsik. He should have eliminated him when he had the opportunity instead of showing mercy, instead of simply removing him from the organization and allowing him to walk away. Now that mercy was returning to destroy him. What's his strategy? Hannah pulled up surveillance footage on her phone. He's been meeting with Zara's ex-boyfriend, the one from before you married her. They've been planning something together, something that targets her. Jiho's vision went red at the edges. He'd known about Zara's ex, a man named David Chang who'd treated her poorly enough that she'd escaped that relationship and eventually crossed paths with Jiho. David had attempted to contact her multiple times after their wedding, had made implicit threats about revealing secrets that would destroy her reputation. Jiho had handled him swiftly and thoroughly, or so he'd believed. Apparently David had found new allies and renewed motivation for revenge. Get me everything on David Chang and Jinsik. Every communication, every movement, every person they've contacted. And Hannah, his voice was lethally calm. I want them breathing for now. Hannah nodded and vanished to coordinate. Jiho returned to Zara's room to find her awake and feeding Kofi, her face soft with maternal tenderness. She looked up when he entered and her expression shifted to concern. What's wrong? You have your dangerous face on, the one that means someone's about to have a very bad day. Jiho sat beside her on the bed, careful not to jostle the baby. There's been a threat against me, against my organization, and potentially against you and Kofi. I need to relocate you somewhere more secure than this hospital. Fear flashed across Zara's face, but she held his gaze steadily. Who? Why would anyone target us? We're divorced. I'm not connected to your world anymore. You're the mother of my child, Jiho said gently. That connects you to my world permanently. And there are people who would use you to hurt me, who would threaten Kofi to manipulate my business decisions. I won't allow that. We're leaving within 2 hours. I have a location prepared, somewhere secure, somewhere they can't reach you. Zara's hand tightened protectively around Kofi. What about my apartment, my things, Amina? Everything will be handled. Amina can join us if she wants, or I'll arrange separate protection for her. But Zara, this isn't negotiable. I'm not requesting permission. I'm informing you what's happening because your safety, Kofi's safety, is the only thing that matters right now. His voice softened. I know you're frightened. I know you don't want to be pulled back into this life, but please trust me one more time. Let me protect you. The desperation in his voice, the raw fear underneath his controlled exterior, was what persuaded her. She nodded slowly. Okay, we'll go. But Jiho, you have to promise me something. Promise me you're not going to do anything that endangers you. Kofi needs his father. I need you. The confession hung between them, heavy with implication. Jiho cupped her face with both hands and kissed her forehead. I promise I'm not going anywhere. We're going to survive this together, and when it's over, we're going to fix our marriage and raise our son and be the family we should have been from the beginning. He pulled back to meet her eyes. I love you, Zara. I never stopped loving you. I should have said it 9 months ago, should have fought harder, should have made you believe me. But I'm saying it now. I love you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it. Zara's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. God help me, I never stopped. Even when I hated you, even when I thought you'd betrayed me, even when I was signing those divorce papers and convincing myself I'd be better off alone, I loved you through all of it. Jiho kissed her then, carefully because she was still recovering from surgery, but with enough intensity to leave no doubt about his feelings. When they separated, Kofi had finished nursing and was staring up at them with dark eyes that seemed impossibly aware for someone only hours old. He has your eyes, Zara said softly, stroking their son's cheek. And your determination if the way he fought his way into the world is any indication. Jiho smiled, a rare genuine expression that transformed his usually severe features. Then he's going to be formidable. His phone buzzed again. The vehicle is ready. Hannah is coordinating the transfer. Can you walk or should I carry you? Zara assessed her body honestly. I can walk with assistance, but Jiho, where exactly are we going? Somewhere my enemies can't locate you, somewhere I can keep you safe while I eliminate this threat permanently. The safe house wasn't what Zara expected. She'd imagined something sterile and fortified, a bunker designed for survival rather than living. Instead, Jiho brought them to an expansive compound in the mountains outside Seoul, hidden behind gates and security, but beautiful in a way that stole her breath. Traditional Korean architecture merged with modern defenses, gardens that whispered tranquility, views that stretched endlessly. It was a home, not a fortress, and the distinction mattered more than she'd anticipated. Jiho carried Kofi, while two of his female security personnel helped Zara navigate the stone pathway to the main residence. She was still weak from surgery, her body protesting every step, but she refused a wheelchair because accepting that vulnerability felt like surrender. Inside, the house was warm and personal, nothing like the cold penthouse where Jiho usually operated. There were photographs on the walls, traditional artwork, furniture that looked comfortable rather than expensive. This is your place, she said, recognizing something intimate in the details. Not just a safe house. Your actual home. Jiho's expression was unreadable as he settled Kofi into a crib that had materialized in the master bedroom with remarkable speed. I purchased it 4 years ago, right after we married. I thought maybe eventually we'd need a place away from the city, somewhere peaceful to build a family. Then everything collapsed and I couldn't bring myself to sell it. He looked at her, vulnerability flickering across his features. I used to come here sometimes after the divorce. Sit in this room and imagine what could have been. Now you're here and it's real, and I'm terrified I'm going to wake up and discover it was all fantasy. Zara crossed to him slowly, her hand finding his. This is real. We're real. Whatever happens next, whatever threats are coming, we'll face them together. Jiho pulled her close, careful of her incision, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the entire world through will alone. I won't let anyone harm you, he murmured against her hair. I won't let anyone steal this from us again. The conviction in his voice was absolute, the kind of certainty that came from a man who'd built an empire on keeping promises regardless of cost. The first days at the compound settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Jiho worked from his office, managing his organization remotely while his people addressed the threat Jinsik and David presented. Zara recovered from surgery, her body healing gradually, and learned to navigate new motherhood with Kofi. They existed in a protective bubble separate from the violence brewing in Seoul, pretending briefly that they were just an ordinary family learning to be together. But reality had a way of intruding. On the 4th night, Jiho received a call that made his expression go dark and lethal. He stepped onto the veranda to take it, his voice too low for Zara to hear, but she watched the way his shoulders tensed, the way his free hand curled into a fist. When he returned inside, he was transformed. The gentle man who'd been changing diapers and humming Korean melodies was gone, replaced by the crime lord who controlled Seoul's shadows. We need to talk, he said, his voice carefully modulated. It's about David and what he's planning. Zara's stomach dropped. She settled Kofi in the crib and followed Jiho to his office, closing the door behind them. The room was lined with monitors displaying security feeds, maps of Seoul marked with territories and rival factions, the visual architecture of Jiho's power. He opened a file on his computer and turned the screen toward her. These are communications my people intercepted between David and Jinsik. Zara leaned forward to read, her blood freezing as she absorbed what she was seeing. Plans to abduct her, plans to use her as leverage against Jiho, plans that detailed disturbingly specific ways they'd hurt her to force his compliance. He wants to destroy me, Jiho said quietly. Jinsik has been orchestrating this for 7 years, waiting for the perfect vulnerability. The divorce provided it. He found David, learned about your history together, learned about the pregnancy before I did. The security footage that destroyed our marriage, Jinsik arranged it. Paid that woman to stage encounters with me, manipulated the videos, ensured they reached you at precisely the right moment to cause maximum damage. He orchestrated everything because he knew the most effective way to hurt me was through you. Zara felt sick, her hand pressing against her stomach, as if she could somehow protect the healing wound there. Why? Why would someone invest so much in revenge? Because I took everything from him when I expelled him from the organization. His wealth, his influence, his standing. He's been existing in the shadows for 7 years, building alliances, waiting for vengeance. And now he believes he has it. Or he thinks he does. Jiho's expression was cold and calculating, the face of a man who'd survived countless attempts on his life and emerged more dangerous each time. But he made a critical error. He threatened my family, and that's unforgivable. Zara saw the violence in his eyes, the promise of retribution, and part of her was terrified while another part, a part she didn't want to examine closely, was grateful. Grateful he was dangerous, grateful he was ruthless, grateful he was hers. "What are you going to do?" she asked, though she wasn't certain she wanted the answer. Jiho closed the laptop, his jaw set. "I'm going to end this permanently. Jinsik and David both. They initiated this war, and I'm going to conclude it in the only language men like them comprehend. But first I need you to understand something. What I'm about to do, the actions I'm going to authorize, the violence that's coming, it's not who I want to be. It's who I have to be to keep you safe, to keep Kofi safe. If that makes you hate me again, I'll accept it, but I won't apologize for protecting my family." "I don't hate you," Zara said firmly. "I'm terrified for you, terrified of losing you, but I don't hate you for doing what's necessary." She moved closer, taking his face in her hands. "Just promise me you'll come back. Promise me you won't do something reckless and heroic that gets you killed. Kofi needs his father. I need my husband." Jiho's eyes widened at the word husband. "We're divorced," he said carefully, like he was afraid to hope. "Are we?" Zara's smile was soft and determined. "A piece of paper doesn't change how I feel. It doesn't change the fact that you're the only man I've ever truly wanted, the only future I can imagine. So yes, Jiho, you're my husband. You've always been my husband. The divorce was just an error we're going to correct." Jiho kissed her with enough passion to make her forget the pain of her healing body, forget the threats lurking in soul, forget everything except the feeling of his hands in her hair and his heart beating against hers. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, he rested Dia's forehead against hers. "I'm going to marry you again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Properly this time with our son present, with your family there if you want them, with the entire world knowing you're mine. But first I have to address Jinsik and David. And Zara, what I'm about to do, it won't be clean or honorable or anything you should witness." "Then don't tell me the details," she said simply. "Do what you must and come home to us. That's all I ask." Jiho pulled back to study her, his eyes searching hers for any trace of doubt or fear, but all he found was trust, absolute and unwavering, and it humbled him in ways violence never had. "How did I get this fortunate?" he murmured, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Zara agreed with a slight smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway. Now go handle this." And Jiho, her voice dropped, becoming fierce. "Make them regret ever threatening what's yours." The operation unfolded swiftly and brutally, executed with the kind of precision that came from 12 years of controlling Seoul's underworld. Jiho's forces moved on Jinsik's locations simultaneously, severing escape routes, neutralizing supporters, dismantling the network he'd constructed piece by piece. Jiho personally led the team that pursued David because some things required a direct approach, required sending a message that would resonate through every rival faction in the city. They located David in a warehouse near the harbor, surrounded by hired security who dispersed the instant they recognized Kwon Jiho's face. David attempted to flee. They always attempted to flee. But Jiho's team was faster, better trained, more motivated because they understood what happened when you threaten the boss's family. They forced David to his knees in the warehouse center, restrained and bleeding from a split lip where he'd tried to resist. Jiho approached deliberately, his expensive shoes silent on the concrete, his presence filling the space with the kind of menace that made hardened criminals retreat. David looked up at him with defiant eyes that couldn't quite conceal the terror underneath. You can't eliminate me, he said. I have connections, people who will retaliate if I vanish. Jiho crouched before him, his expression empty and cold. You threatened my wife, my son. You conspired to hurt them, to use them against me. His voice was conversational, almost pleasant, which somehow made it more frightening. Do you genuinely believe your connections matter now? Do you think anyone in this city is foolish enough to start a war over you? David swallowed hard, his bravado fracturing. She was mine first, before you, before your money and your power. She loved me and you stole her. The delusion in his voice was almost remarkable. She was never yours, Jiho said flatly. You hurt her, controlled her, made her believe she was worth less than she was. I offered her freedom and respect and love. That's why she chose me. That's why even divorced, even separated, she's still mine and always will be. He stood, nodding to his team. Ensure he comprehends what happens when you threaten my family. Then ensure no one ever locates him. David's screams followed Jiho out of the warehouse, echoing off metal walls, but he didn't look back. Some things required brutality, some messages required blood. That was the reality of his world. Jinsik proved more elusive. He'd gone underground the moment his network started collapsing, vanished into one of the safe locations he'd prepared for precisely this scenario. But Jiho had resources Jinsik couldn't match, informants in every district of Seoul, technology that could track digital phantoms. They found him 5 days after David disappeared, hiding in an apartment in Songpa with enough weapons to initiate a small conflict. The assault was surgical. Jiho's tactical unit breached the entrance at dawn, moving through the apartment with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. Jinsik managed to fire 3 shots before they overwhelmed him, all missing wildly, all desperate. When the chaos settled, he was bleeding from a shoulder wound and cursing in Korean while Jiho's men secured the location. Jiho entered the apartment once it was cleared, stepping over debris and shell casings, his expression carved from granite. Jinsik looked up at him with hatred-filled eyes. You think this concludes anything? I'm not the only one who wants you dead. There are others. There will always be others. Jiho positioned a chair and sat, his posture relaxed despite the violence surrounding them. You're correct. There will always be others. That's the nature of power. But you made an error, Jinsik. You made it personal. You targeted my family and that I cannot permit. He leaned forward. So here's what's happening. You're going to confess everything. Every detail of how you orchestrated the footage, how you found David, how you planned to use my wife against me. You're going to document it all. And then you're going to disappear. And if I refuse, Jinsik's voice was defiant, but his eyes revealed his fear. Then you die here, immediately, and I release evidence to every organization in Seoul that you've been embezzling from all of them, not just me. They'll hunt down everyone you care about, everyone you've ever loved, and make examples of them. Your decision. Make it quickly. Jinsik's resistance crumbled. He confessed everything, his voice captured on video that would serve as insurance and proof. When he finished, when every detail had been documented, Jiho stood and nodded to Hannah. The standard protocol. No one finds him, no one mourns him. Jinsik's face went ashen, but he didn't beg. At least he retained that much dignity. Jiho returned to the compound as the sun was setting, exhausted in ways that transcended physical fatigue. He'd spent 5 days dismantling threats, ending lives, executing the dark work that kept his empire secure. His hands were physically clean because he never participated in the violence directly, but his conscience wasn't. It never was after operations like this. He found Zara in the nursery, holding Kofi and singing softly in Yoruba, the language of her grandmother. She looked up when he entered, her eyes searching his face for signs of injury. "You're okay," she asked, the relief in her voice palpable. "You're home." "I'm home," he confirmed, crossing to them and enfolding both wife and son in his arms. "It's finished. Jinsik and David won't threaten anyone again." Zara didn't request details. She simply leaned into him, trusting him to carry the weight of what he'd done. They remained like that for extended moments, breathing together, finding peace in proximity. Eventually, Kofi fell asleep and Zara placed him in the crib with the practiced care of new motherhood. When she turned back to Jiho, her expression was serious. "We need to discuss the future, about what happens now that the threat is eliminated." "Now we reconstruct," Jiho said simply. "We repair our marriage. We raise our son. We find a way to balance my world with the life you deserve." Zara moved closer, her hands resting on his chest. "I want to marry you again, properly, with Kofi present, with witnesses, with vows that we both mean this time. But Jiho, I need you to understand something. I can't exist in constant fear. I can't spend every day wondering if someone's going to use me against you, if our son is going to grow up surrounded by violence. If we do this, if we make this work, things must change." He knew she was right. He'd been considering the same thing during the return from Seoul, during the quiet moments between violence when his mind had space to contemplate the future. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his hands settling on her waist. "Tell me what would make you feel secure, and I'll make it happen." Zara took a breath, gathering courage. "I need you to begin transitioning your operations to something legitimate. Not immediately, I know that's impossible, but progressively, over years if necessary. I need to know that when Kofi is old enough to understand, his father isn't someone he has to be ashamed of." Jiho was silent for an extended moment, processing the request. What she was asking would require years, would demand careful maneuvering, would mean relinquishing the power he'd spent 12 years accumulating. But when he looked at his son sleeping peacefully, when he felt Zara's heartbeat under his palms, the decision was obvious. "I'll do it," he said. "Not instantaneously, but I'll begin transferring my assets to legitimate enterprises. Real estate, technology, finance, operations that don't require violence to sustain. It'll require time and there will be obstacles, but Zara, for you, for him, I'll become whoever I need to be." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks. That's all I needed to hear. Not promises that you'll transform overnight, just promises that you're willing to try, that our family matters more than your empire. She pulled him down for a kiss that tasted like salt and hope and new beginnings. When they separated, Jiho's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you," he said roughly. "More than power, more than my organization, more than anything I've ever constructed. You and Kofi, you're my legacy now. Everything else is just mechanics." They were married again 8 weeks later in the garden of the mountain compound, surrounded by people who mattered. Amina stood as Zara's witness, crying openly as her best friend exchanged vows with the man she'd never stopped loving. Hannah stood for Jiho, her usually stern expression softened by genuine happiness for her boss. Kofi slept through most of the ceremony in his grandmother's arms because Zara's mother had traveled from Lagos specifically for this moment, her initial wariness of Jiho gradually dissolving under his obvious devotion to her daughter and grandson. The vows were simple but profound. Jiho promised to love Zara through every challenge, to be the husband and father his family deserved, to choose them over empire every single day. Zara promised to trust him even when fear suggested otherwise, to build a future together that honored both their histories, to love him through transformation and growth and whatever followed. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, when Jiho kissed his bride with enough passion to make the small gathering applaud and laugh, it felt like an ending and a beginning simultaneously. The reception was intimate and warm, nothing like the elaborate wedding they'd had initially. That wedding had been about appearances and impressing influential people and maintaining Jiho's reputation. This one was about love, pure and simple, about celebrating a family that had survived separation and lies and violence to find their way back to each other. Jiho danced with Zara under string lights in the garden, holding her close while music played and their son slept nearby. "This is perfect," Zara murmured against his chest. "This is everything I never knew I needed." 8 months later, life had settled into a new rhythm. Jiho was systematically transitioning his assets to legitimate enterprises, using his considerable intelligence and ruthlessness to construct legal empires instead of criminal ones. It was slower than violence, but more sustainable, and he discovered unexpected satisfaction in building operations that didn't require blood to maintain. Zara had resumed her online education, completing the degree she'd abandoned years ago, finding purpose beyond motherhood, though Kofi remained her greatest joy. They'd established themselves in the mountain compound permanently, transforming it into a genuine home with Kofi's toys scattered across expensive rugs and baby monitors in every room. One evening after Kofi was asleep and the house was quiet, Zara found Jiho on the veranda staring out at the mountains. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He covered her hands with his, holding her close. "I'm thinking about how close I came to losing everything. How if you hadn't called me that night, if I hadn't been there for Kofi's birth, I might have spent the rest of my existence alone and angry and hollow. I'm thinking about second chances and how rare they are." "We almost didn't survive," Zara agreed softly. "So many times we almost lost each other completely. But we didn't. We fought our way back and now we have this." She pulled back, turning him to face her. "Jiho, I need to tell you something." His expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is Kofi?" She laughed at his immediate protective instinct. "Everyone's fine, better than fine actually." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're pregnant again. I discovered it this morning. We're going to have another baby." Jiho's face cycled through multiple expressions: shock, joy, fear, excitement, all rotating in rapid succession. "Another baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "We're having another baby. Are you certain you're ready? After everything with Kofi, after the emergency surgery?" Zara smiled, seeing the worry in his eyes. "I'm certain, and this time you'll be present from the beginning. Every appointment, every milestone, everything we missed initially." Jiho dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against her stomach, his arms encircling her waist. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for offering me another chance. Thank you for loving me enough to build this life together." The second pregnancy was easier in some aspects, more difficult in others. Easier because Jiho was present for everything, driving her to appointments, reading pregnancy literature with the same intensity he'd once applied to business strategy, preparing their home for another child. More difficult because chasing after a toddler while pregnant was exhausting, and because morning sickness affected Zara more severely this time. But they navigated it together, Jiho assuming more childcare responsibilities, Zara accepting assistance instead of attempting to manage everything herself. When their daughter was born 9 months later, delivered without complications in the same hospital where Kofi had entered the world, Jiho held her with tears streaming down his face. "She looks like you," Zara said, exhausted but radiant as she watched her husband cradle their daughter. "Same features, same serious expression." Jiho laughed through his tears. "God help us if she inherits my determination. Between her and Kofi, we're going to have our hands full." They named her Amara after Zara's mother, honoring the family that had shaped her while building a future that would shape their daughter. 3 years later, the transformation was complete. Jiho had successfully transitioned his empire from criminal enterprise to legitimate business conglomerate. It had required years of careful maneuvering, of negotiating deals and forming alliances, of gradually withdrawing from the violence that had once defined his existence. He still commanded respect, still wielded power, but it originated from wealth and influence rather than fear. Some of his former associates thought he'd become weak. Jiho didn't care. He possessed something more valuable than their respect. He had a family. Zara had completed her degree and begun working remotely as a consultant, using her language abilities and cultural knowledge to help corporations navigate international markets. It was fulfilling work that allowed her to contribute financially while remaining present for their children. Kofi was 4 now, intelligent and curious, and displaying signs of inheriting both parents' determination. Amara was 3, quieter than her brother, but with an intensity of focus that reminded everyone of her father. Together they filled the mountain compound with laughter and chaos, and the kind of joy Jiho had never imagined possible. One evening after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Jiho discovered Zara in their bedroom preparing for sleep. He enfolded his arms around her from behind, watching their reflection in the mirror. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. Relinquishing your independence to marry a reformed criminal, raising your children in my world even though it's not what you planned? Zara turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his face. Not for a second. This life, this family, it's everything I never knew I was searching for. We've faced challenges, we've confronted things that should have destroyed us, but we survived. More than survived. We flourished. Jiho kissed her softly. I love you more now than when we first married, more tomorrow than today. Every day I wake up and choose you all over again. Zara smiled against his lips. That's all I ever wanted. Someone who chooses me, who fights for us, who believes love is worth the effort. And you, Kwon Jiho, you've demonstrated that every single day since you walked into that hospital room and refused to leave. He pulled her closer, grateful for second chances, grateful for the woman who'd rescued him from himself, grateful for the family they'd constructed from the ruins of their failed first attempt. Years passed and the life they built only grew stronger. Kofi began school and displayed early signs of his father's business intelligence, negotiating with other children with the kind of strategic thinking that made Jiho both proud and slightly concerned. Amara developed a passion for music and art, her gentle nature balancing her brother's intensity. They matured knowing their father had a complicated history but witnessing daily how he'd transformed, how he'd chosen family over empire, how love had reshaped him into someone worthy of their admiration. On their 12th wedding anniversary, Jiho brought Zara back to the hospital where everything had changed. They stood in the corridor outside what had been Suite 408, holding hands like they had that first night when terror and hope had collided. This is where it began, Zara said softly. Where you returned to my life and refused to leave. Jiho pulled her close. This is where I became a father, where I realized that losing you was the greatest mistake of my existence, where I decided I would do whatever was necessary to deserve a second chance. He kissed her temple. Best phone call I ever received. They departed the hospital and drove to the mountain compound where their children were being supervised by Amina and Hannah, an unlikely friendship that had formed over years of shared concern for the family. Inside, Kofi and Amara were constructing an elaborate fort in the living room, their laughter echoing through the house. Jiho watched them play and felt his chest constrict with emotions he still wasn't fully comfortable expressing. This is what I was designed for, he said quietly. Not controlling criminal empires or making enemies fear my name. This. Being their father, being your husband, constructing something genuine instead of merely surviving. Zara leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. You've built an extraordinary life for all of us. I'm proud of you, proud of the man you've become. The words meant more to him than any business achievement, any amount of wealth, any measure of power ever had. That night after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Jiho and Zara lay in bed discussing the future, about potentially having another child, about the business opportunities emerging in new markets, about growing old together and watching their grandchildren play in these same gardens. It was a future Jiho had never imagined possible when he'd been Seoul's Shadow King. But now, wrapped in Zara's arms with his children sleeping down the corridor, he couldn't imagine wanting anything else. The phone that had rung at 2:47 in the morning 9 months after their divorce, the call that had brought him to the hospital, had transformed everything. It had restored his family, it had offered him a second chance at love, it had given him a daughter, and then a son, and a future worth living for. Jiho had spent 12 years constructing an empire of fear and violence. But ultimately the only empire that mattered was the one he built with Zara, an empire of love and trust and second chances, an empire that would endure longer than any criminal organization because it was founded on something stronger than fear. It was founded on family. And that was worth more than all the power in Seoul. That was worth everything. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, beautiful people. See you in the next one.